everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexi. This episode continues our season looking at modern retellings of the Iliad and the Odyssey, ancient epics known for both brutal violence and instances of sexual assault. This episode is not suitable for under 18s. We hope you have your favourite beverage and snack ready to go, because we've got our teas and are ready to start spilling the tea on our latest ancient story. This week, Lexi and I read The Lost Books of the Odyssey, a novel by Zachary Mason. While it's not what either of us was expecting, it was a really, really good read. If you're interested in reading a very non-traditional interpretation of the Odyssey and all of the stories contained within it, then listen on. I think you'll enjoy the show today.
So, I want to know, what tea are you drinking?
I have mango pineapple green tea today.
Mango pineapple.
Yes.
I can't say as I've ever tried mango pineapple, but now I have like a strange feeling that I must try it.
It's very good. If you find some, I would recommend it. It's one of those Aldi gets random things in every so often, and it's just one of their, today we have a random tea selection, and I always buy a couple because they're not teas I usually see elsewhere. And yeah, they're good. I like them.
Okay. I'm like, Megan, at some point we're going to sit down and have to talk teas, right? Because I'm coming from not recently anymore, but I was just in the UK for a whole summer. And there were lots of teas that I was like, what is this? This is amazing. But also, what is this? So anyway, they're very different from American teas. So I'm just like, we should talk tea at some point. Just tea.
What are you drinking today, if anything?
I have a bottle of water next to me.
Excellent choice. Hydration is important.
I like hydration, but I will get my tea in like an hour.
Today we are talking about The Lost Books of the Odyssey, which is by Zachary Mason. This is his first novel, and it made the New York Times bestseller list, which is, I think, pretty impressive for someone's first novel. So I didn't look at what this really was before I picked it up to read it, which was both wonderful and a bad move, because it's not a narrative from start to finish. It is framed as fragments. It's when it says The Lost Books of the Odyssey, he's not like being hyperbolic. They're small fragments of story. Like, I think maybe the longest is maybe 10 pages. And they are different, like, retellings, reimaginings, little snippets of story that you don't see from the Odyssey, but are framed within that same narrative and the same framework. So I read the first couple of chapters, which were like 4 pages, and was very confused and hated it. Absolutely hated it. It was confusing. It was annoying. I didn't know what was going on. Definition of confusing, really, isn't it? But the more I read, the more I enjoyed it. And there are some segments that I enjoyed more than others. But by the end, I really enjoyed the experience. And it's something that I need to reread probably 2 or 3 times, I think, because there's a lot in there and it's quite hard to process, I think, everything that's going on the first read through. So I enjoyed it. I was not expecting to after the first 2 or 3 chapters, but no, I liked it very much. What were your impressions?
First impression was, this is a very alternative mythology, and unfortunately, because I'm into politics as a political scientist now, which is weird to say because I'm always used to being like, no, I'm just a classicist. But also, I suppose if you get your MA or MSc in poli-sci, you're also a political scientist. So the first thing I thought was like, oh my god, this is like alternative facts, right? I was like, oh no, what did I walk into? This is so Trumpy. I was gonna be like, is this Kellyanne Conway's like mythological fever dream? Because I honestly was like, this is like her fever dream. Or any like crazy Republican who just like co-ops and takes over mythology. But it's not, because quickly after the first, again, like you, couple of chapters, I was like, yes, it's very alternative, but I liked how there were deliberate choices, and you could tell this is much deeper, and so this is not, in fact, the realm of alternative facts and mythology. Luckily, the organization is hectic. I also knew nothing about this, but I was just like, okay, bought it on Audible and then started listening and like, okay, whatever we get, we get. I was like, okay, a bit of a slap in the face, not gonna lie. But I kind of like how it picks up on like stories we thought would be tried and true. And then there's like big plot twist. I guess it's like a combination of I like how it's taking stories that we thought were predictable, that we knew. I guess I do and I don't love that he just takes our beautiful original Homeric epic, and then instead of just like, and now what could have happened? Like without any kind of preface, you just go, and then this is the story we know, and then suddenly it morphs into something else, and then you're like, wait, is this like for real? Yeah, but I don't know. I think overall, like, it's unpredictable, but I like there's the delight and the familiarity, right, of having the same mythic characters that you're very used to. I will say, if you're not familiar with Homer's epics, you will struggle. Don't read this if you have not read the source material first, because that is where I think it's most dangerous, where you probably would be like, oh yeah, so this is like Greek myth, right? I have no perspective when it comes to this, because I grew up reading a lot of mythological stuff, and I also became a classicist because I also wanted to study the ancient world when I was 11 years old, which is like absurdly young to be studying this, but I was a weird kid. I was just that history loving kid. But I would imagine it's the same as like reading Percy Jackson before you've really read any kind of Greek myth, because while Rick Riordan is correct in a lot of details, his stories do deviate, right? Like any good piece of fiction that is inspired by, but not an exact retelling. But yeah, again, classified as just one of those. Please know the source material, because there was, what was it, chapter 4? I don't remember what it was, but it was the one where Odysseus comes home and if you know the source material, you're expecting he comes home and he's gonna find all these suitors living in his house, and he kind of, famously goes on a rampage and kills them. Yeah, not this one, man. He comes home and then he like, what did it say? It described him as noticing that his wife acted weird. Do you remember the exact
So
wording?
there are 3, 4, maybe 5 chapters that describe Odysseus' homecoming. I think it's worth saying up front that this is not like Natalie Haynes' Thousand Ships. You're not getting the Odysseus that turns up in each chapter is not the same character every time, with like just jumping around on a timeline. It's a different Odysseus and a different story every single time. So you get like 4 different homecomings, and one of them, he comes home and he's already there. And earlier in the story, he's at Troy and this Trojan comes in and says, I'm Odysseus. For some reason, I woke up in Troy as a Trojan, married to a Trojan woman. I don't know what's going on. And the Greek Odysseus kind of questions him about his childhood and his marriage and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, it's Odysseus just in the wrong body. And he gives him like a sack of gold and sends him on his merry way. And Trojan Odysseus goes back to Ithaca, to Penelope, and rules in Greek Odysseus's place. So Greek Odysseus gets back to Ithaca. There's this dude there, and obviously because he's disguised, no one knows that he's the real Greek Odysseus. So there's this Odysseus already there, and he gives him a sack of gold and sends him on his merry way. I really like kind of like the book ending and the symmetry of that. But there's another one where he comes back again in disguise, and Penelope is there, and she's like this super powerful, like sexually charged queen, and she's got this boy toy kind of lying at her feet, and the suitors are there, but they're all kind of under her thrall. And Odysseus leaves quite swiftly, and then you get a narrative of how he met Penelope, and it turns out she's a werewolf. He goes to a forest to meet her and ask her father if he could please marry her, because she's a princess, he's a prince, it makes sense. And they live in the forest, and they don't eat using knives and forks, they eat with their bare hands, and she has this like glowing green luminous eyes. And at some point she takes him into the forest and turns into a wolf, and he doesn't run away or try and kill her or anything. So then, okay, they're married. So you get this little bit of narrative, and then the next day Odysseus goes back to the palace, and Penelope has de-transformed, maybe, and her maidservants are scrubbing the floors. Clearly she's gone wolf on all of the suitors, slaughtered them all, and then turned back into the meek, subservient woman that she's expected to be. And at the end, Odysseus says something along the lines of, "She knows I wouldn't tolerate infidelity." It's interesting and it's quite jarring because you know that he knows that she's been essentially running a harem of men. There's something going on. He's split the two Penelope personas, and his Penelope isn't actually running a harem. She's been waiting faithfully. So yeah, it was fascinating.
Wait, no, I love the one. What is it called? Wait, I'm looking in my chapters on my audiobook. A sad revelation. It's the one where he comes back, right? And then Penelope's remarried, right?
Yeah, that's the first chapter in the book, and it was confusing because it describes this homecoming, but he's not coming home to a palace. He's coming home to like a farmhouse with sheep, and his wife has aged, as you would expect, in 20 years and remarried, and he just sees that she's happy. There's this husband there. Of course there's a husband there. Who would expect her to wait that long? And then he essentially, I think the end of the chapter, and it's very short, it's 2.5 pages, and then he realizes, the last paragraph of the chapter, he realizes that this isn't true. This is some illusion sent to him by a god, and he's in the middle of his wanderings and he just has to keep going, which was, yeah. It's at that point I realized this is a different book. This is going to be very different to what we've experienced.
Yeah, we open up with she's remarried and then she's not. And then you have, the ones you just talked about. And then you have the one where he comes back, right? And then he sees like her shade and then he's like, what's going on? And then it's like, she's dead. Spoiler, she's dead. And he's all like, oh my God, she's dead. What do I do?
And there's another one where when he does his underworld vision, Penelope's there and she doesn't recognize him, and she says, "I was told my husband was never coming home." And he said, "Well, essentially, eventually I will die and you'll be waiting for me here." And she says, "I have no idea who you are, traveler. Go away and stop bothering me." And it was really poignant. A lot of this was really emotionally charged, which I think is quite difficult to do when you're working with such small page counts.
Which was a bold choice. I mean, it didn't have to be that short, but I guess he wanted it to be, which is really, really impressive. I did want to ask though, did you have a favorite, should we call them short story? Dare we?
Yeah, let's go with short story. There's one in there about Ariadne, which to begin with felt very out of place because Ariadne obviously does not really show up in the Odyssey, but it narrates her falling in love with Theseus and helping Theseus slay the Minotaur, and then she goes back to Athens with him, and it describes them having a wonderful marriage and beautiful children, and then Theseus is off looking for a sword down in the basement and realizes he's back in the labyrinth, and somehow time has shifted and the marriage that they've had together hasn't really happened, but he can remember it and he thinks somehow that she's tricking him. So then we get the Ariadne story that we're familiar with, where Theseus uses her to help him kill the Minotaur and to escape, but then he leaves her on the island. So you kind of get the story told twice with very different endings. But the Ariadne who's left on the island essentially becomes a witch and haunts the island. People describe her as being like a naiad or a spirit or something similar. And then Odysseus washes up and suddenly she's Calypso. And then you think, oh, this is how it's playing into the Odyssey. This is why it's included in this book. And it was just the very last paragraph maybe links it to the Odyssey, but you get this whole beautiful, interesting and very confusing story kind of fronting that. Did you have one that really caught your attention?
Yeah, I had a couple, but I really liked the one about Cassandra. That one was like wild because this is where we see how she gets the gift of prophecy from Apollo. And, for the most part, I was like, okay, it's pretty accurate, right? It follows everything we know from the Iliad, the Odyssey, and I want to say Aeschylus's Agamemnon, which is, I think, well, is there one more work that covers her? I don't remember at this point, but those are like the three main ones. So yeah, that one really, really caught my eye. I'm trying to see how long this chapter was read. It's 4 minutes. It's pretty short. So this short story was great. Yeah, I kind of like how it's not the classical take on her curse, right? Where it's like she's doomed to say a prophecy and then people just ignore her because they're like, okay, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I liked how there was the plot twist where she legitimately believed what she was saying, right? It was a deliberate choice, and I like this choice because it really drives home this almost, like, claustrophobic entrapment, right? Where if she really I don't know, it's like it plays up the idea that, like, "Oh, Apollo lied to her," right? And, like yeah, I don't know, it's like she really it's not she's not just saying stuff, she believes in it. So when you really believe in something, then you truly are, like, trapped by fate, but, like, you also have this idea of people are like, she's not just trapped by fate, but she's also this, like, intelligent very intelligent girl. She's a bit rebellious, right? She's like Odysseus. I love the parallels between her and Odysseus. But, like, while they have parallel stories of both being, like, deeply intelligent people trapped by fate, then there's this mirroring of Cassandra can never escape her fate, right? But Odysseus is consistently trying to outrun his own fate. It's like tragedy, but on steroids, because it really like, this chapter really I call it a chapter. Like, this snippet, it's not even a chapter, but this snippet really in the, like, 2 pages that he had, he somehow really drives home the point that 2 characters, very paralleled. One is successful, one is not. They're both kinda trapped. Boom, and you're like, "Oh." So, I don't know, it's, like, short enough that it kinda slaps you in the face with that revelation, and then you're like, "That's so deep," in, like, 2 pages. Yeah, yeah. I don't know, it just there's something about it brings out the tragedy and the the humanity of the characters involved, right? Because 'Cause you're I don't know, yeah. That one struck me. Yeah, that one was really powerful. I also really liked I don't know if I'm just on a kick for certain characters, but what is it? The Agamemnon chapter, right? Agamemnon and the world. Basically, he demands shortened, like, concise versions of what is life or whatever.
Yeah, and it's again, it's 5 pages, and it describes Agamemnon building a castle, like tunneling under the ground because he can't build up on the beach of Troy. So he tunnels underground, and every time there's like a cave in, they just tunnel in a different direction. And he sends 3 advisors, including Odysseus, out to find, like,
Writing a book explaining, like,
essentially,
everything in the world? Was that correct?
yeah,
I was like, so he wants the theory of everything? But
yeah, in
okay.
one book. One book.
In
He sends them out to, like, the sum of all human knowledge in one book. And they
yes.
come back, it's so cool. They come back with a book that can be read forwards and backwards and then differently if you skip every third word and all of human knowledge. And he's like, no, this is absolutely not at all what I wanted, and sends them off again. And he does this like 3 times. And each time they come back, Troy is more and more ruined, and Agamemnon's palace is deeper and deeper underground. And then Odysseus is the only one who comes back finally, and he says he gives him a ring, and he says he's inscribed, like, the whole human knowledge, just one word on this ring, and then Agamemnon dies.
Yeah. And then you're like, "Oh, okay."
What I have to ask, what was the one snippet short story that was the weirdest for you to read?
Does it have to be the weirdest, or can it just be, like, most surprising?
Surprising also works.
The Polyphemus one, maybe? Just because you're not used to hearing from and you don't expect to hear from a Cyclops, right?
And he's understandably angry with Odysseus, but angry because, like, he wasn't going to hurt them. He was a little bit pissed that he came back home and found them in his food. But
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also just, like, that he claims he wasn't fooled when Odysseus called himself nobody. You know, he was just like, "Oh, I thought it was impolite to ask questions because obviously this is strange, but I shouldn't say anything." Yeah, I don't know. It's because we're so trained to sort of sympathize with the quote unquote bad guy in the tale, right? So you can see how, I mean, it plays around with perspective where you're like, the idea of who's truly the good guy or the bad guy, the protagonist or the antagonist, is really framed by the storyteller's own perspective, and all we get, right, in the original is just Odysseus this, Odysseus that. And it was quite interesting because in this, these works, Odysseus isn't always even the focus. He kind of just like appears in some of them and as like a tangentially related sort of side person, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, different, right?
The one that I think I found the strangest to read, there's a chapter that there's a little footnote by it's kind of put together like a translation of actual ancient text. So occasionally there are little footnotes from the translator explaining interesting points. And this one has a footnote saying this text purports to be from whatever classical Greece, but much more likely comes from medieval Europe somewhere. It's like, okay, that's interesting. And it's a discussion on how the Odyssey and the Iliad are actually rule books for chess, ancient game of chess. And I was a little perplexed reading it because even in a book that is so surprising and you take so many very sharp right turns when you're not expecting to, and each chapter is drastically different from the last, that was a little jarring and a little odd.
I mean, it's jarring, but you know what? I love it. Maybe it's because I'm a chess fan. I play chess. I've grown up playing chess, so I love it. So I guess that's why, like, for me, that one was not like super weird because I was just like, yes,
Of
like,
course, it's a chess game. What else would it be?
yeah, I was like, I mean, look at you and you're like three-dimensional thinking. I'm like, this is brilliant. So yeah, I guess but you know what? The chess thing did remind me, now that you say it, it did remind me of, oh, what's it called? Oh my God, what's it called? The 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 Queen's Gambit, right? Is that the I didn't watch it. Is that the chess one?
I haven't watched it, but yeah.
Okay, I think it's the Queen's Gambit. But yeah, it's the one where the, like, girl was into chess, and then I just know that, like, everyone was watching it around the, pandemic times, and, like, everyone was obsessed with it, so yeah. I don't know, it reminded me of, like, Queen's Gambit type of thing, and I was like, "This is brilliant." So, I really liked it, actually.
What did you think of the fragment that had Achilles as a golem?
That one I hadn't I mean, I was just like, "This is fucking weird, man." I I mean, I guess I was also trying to look at, like, my when I was in undergrad, I took a class on it was I don't know why they even ran this or let me take it. It was too good to be a class in undergrad. But they let me take a class on, uh, Harry Potter and alchemy and religion. Like, amazing class. But we in that one, we kind of dissect using highly mythological creatures and references and alchemical things and all the things you would expect essentially in in stories. And so this harkened me back to that because I was like, I'm pretty sure we talked about golems in that class, right? As being kind of mysterious and actually, it was funny because I also remembered it was twofold. There's a golem legend that there's supposed to be a golem hidden in the top floor of a certain church in Prague. And so when I was touring around with my friend, she was like, "Wait, let me take you into this ancient church because there's a golem, like living somewhere in here." And so we were like running around this church being like, "Where's the golem? I can't find it. Can you find it?" We never found it. I think it was tourist kitschy thing, but yeah, it was hilarious. So I was analyzing it of two minds. I was like, okay, I'm trying to remember what this class taught me about golems, and then I'm also just looking at this is the weirdest thing. So why? Why would he have picked a golem out of all the things? Maybe I read way too much into it.
No, I just what was really interesting for me. So for people who haven't read it, Odysseus is essentially kidnapped by Agamemnon. They then go to get Achilles, who has just died from a snake bite, maybe. And Odysseus says, "Well, I can't go back empty-handed. Agamemnon will kill me." So they just randomly make Achilles out of clay and inscribe life on his forehead, and he comes to life. And Patroclus goes with them. In this version, he's the son of the king that Achilles has been living with. So Patroclus goes with them to kind of like hide the ruse so no one gets killed. And it works, right? They've got this golem. He can't be hurt because he's made of clay. So he's a fighting machine and does all the things in Troy that he's supposed to do. And then Patroclus dies. And there's this really poignant scene where the golem is like trying to get Patroclus to wake up because he doesn't understand what death is. He's lost his friend. He wants his friend to get back up. And it's kind of tragic. And it's a point in the Iliad that is always tragic, but it was tragic in a different way. And I found that very interesting. And I also enjoyed Odysseus as a trickster, the intelligent man that we've all come to expect, but from a very different angle that I would I don't think if I had 1,000 years I could have come up with that particular story.
I don't think so either. I don't know, but did you think more into why a golem out of all the things, or were you just like, "Nope, I'm going with it"?
I didn't. It felt when I started the chapter, it did feel a little off because I golems are not things that I associate with ancient Greece, and I don't also know enough to know that if golems are a thing. I don't think they are, but I don't know. But then what did get me thinking was kind of the practice of making cult statues. And in Mesopotamia, at least, they are, once they're made, they're considered that there are various rituals where the craftsmen throw away their tools and they swear that they didn't build this statue because it can't have been built. It is literally a god. It just came into existence. And that kind of idea of making a being that is alive or divine, it felt kind of related. It's not the same because obviously the cult statues you don't watch them get up and walk around, but it's the same idea of making something animate out of inanimate natural materials. So that was interesting. I don't know if that's where the author was going with it or getting it from, that kind of idea, but yeah, it was, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, this is a really fascinating way to show this aspect of Odysseus and to explain this part of the story.
I also wonder, I mean, this was written way before it came out, but so it couldn't have been influenced by. But a lot of it and like the creation and the fact that you like sculpt things, it's very funny because I thought about, do you remember that Odyssey quest in Assassin's Creed where it's like the little girl who crafted her friends out of clay and then
Yes, I
like
do
you
remember. That was delightful and also tragic.
yeah, so it's like you have like Cassandra or Alexios like walk up to this little girl and you're like, "Why is this little girl playing in the mud? We shall go find out." And then it's like, "Oh." And then she's all, my mother is dead. So she told me to go make friends. So she was like, "See? Silly
And I
Misthios,
did.
I have made my friends out of clay." And you're like, "Oh, you poor thing. No one taught you that. That's not okay. Woo!" And so obviously depending on whether you want to be nice or mean, you can say good job and leave her and be sad, or you say snap out of it. This is not how you make friends, and then she gets mad at you and goes away. Um, but I don't. You know what? That's what I'm saying. This entire thing is like that quest line is like a microcosm of everything. Um, because if I was like summing up and finding a parallel of how weird this book is compared to, like, everything else. That's what I'm going with. I'm just going with, like, "Yup, it's like the little girl and her clay friends." That's what this is. I don't know. Like, did you find yourself as you were reading this thinking, "Actually, I could parallel this with a lot of things from, like, AC Odyssey?"
I didn't, but I should reread it and then go and replay.
I guess, like, okay, I don't assume because I'm like, okay, everyone obviously super different and we all, uh, you know, process things differently, but I don't know. It's because one, I'm obsessed with the game, but everyone who knows me knows that. But also just like it's bonkers in its own way, and I spent so much of my time analyzing why it's bonkers or why it's not, that yeah, my reception brain, once it's like turned on, that's just what I think about. So yeah, I was like, there were several weird quests in Odyssey that I was like, actually though, this is like something I would have seen in the game. Yeah, it was a bit bizarre, but
Right, this is the other episode that I really wanted to ask about was there's a fragment in there where Paris is death,
mhm.
like the divine being death, and comes to visit and steals Helen away with him, and then they go to the kingdom of the dead, which is Troy, and wage war. And it was trippy and weird and amazing, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it too.
It is trippy and weird and amazing because I think that the best part about that is fucking Paris is dead. Like I don't even know how to say, like, I honestly I was listening to that, and the only thing that really registered was Paris is dead. Now we celebrate. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. The angels sing. I was just like, and now the Trojan War and the entire Iliad, it's so much better because I don't have to deal with this dipshit anymore. Like, yay! I loved, put it this way, in an adaptation that's just bonkers, where we get the most bonkers thing that we wish would happen in, like, every other adaptation, I was like, "You do you." I am so happy someone took it upon him or herself to just kill him off, which is the best thing that could have happened because I hate this character so much. So I'm just like, any universe in which I'm like, I can get at least one adaptation where he's just killed off for the betterment of, like, the world. Ah, the angels sing. So, yes. I I didn't, I mean, it's a bit disappointing, but I really didn't have anything deeper only because I was reveling in the fact that
You were just happy.
because as I was listening to it, my brain literally every, I swear to God, and it wasn't even a long section, but, like, every 5 seconds, I was just like, "And he's dead, and he's dead, and he's dead. Anything could happen. I don't care. He's dead." And, well, then I got the "he's dead," and then the periodic, "And I don't even care that Helen might be upset or sad if he's gone." Yeah, so I was just very happy. So, yeah, I was like, "I don't care. Woo!" But wait, no. So, sadly, yeah, that one was kind of disappointing. But wait, there was another chapter, Guest Friend. It's the one where Alcinous, the king of the Phaeacians, right? So, it's the one where they have the super deep conversation, and he says something about how each man is gonna live out his life as a character in a story told by somebody else. I'm not a tattoo person, so I will not get that tattooed on me, but I will happily print that out and stick it on my wall.
It was really in they were all really interesting, and that's like I think chapter 4 or 5, so it's one of the earlier ones, and I need to go back and read it now that my brain has adjusted to what this book is. But as they're talking, Alcinous is describing how in Phoenicia they think they're like stories being told by someone else, and he's thought about maybe trying to find the storyteller, and Odysseus says, no, don't do that, because what if he's satisfied with his story and he ends it and then you cease to exist? And then right at the very end, Odysseus starts telling his own story about a king and a stranger washed up from the sea walking out at night, which is exactly what they're doing, and how they approach a grove of trees, which is hiding the king's men who are under instructions to kill the traveler. And he's like, what if the traveler kind of moves in front of the king so that at the last minute the archers shoot the wrong person? And then it ends with the insinuation that Odysseus is in fact the person telling Alcinous's story, which was, yeah, a little mind-bending. I need to go and read it again.
Yeah, it's mind-bending also because they have this long conversation, but then Alcinous literally disappears from the entire chapter, and you're like, where the fuck did he go? And then Odysseus's voice suddenly merges with like your narrator, who's like this dude in the netherworld, right? Yeah, I don't know. It's this like beautifully, almost like what, self-referential philosophy thing. I don't know. It was beautiful. It was bizarre, and I still wasn't sure. I was like, I don't really know what I'm
I'm
looking
still not
at,
entirely sure what it is I've read.
because it's like so short. So you're like, I don't know what's going on. And then I did want to ask you though. So Odysseus does appear almost like a random side character in a lot of these. What did you think about the two chapters that he himself narrates?
Really interesting. I enjoyed them. One of them, he goes to war as a teenage boy, essentially, and clearly doesn't want to be there and leaves before the end, and then spends his time traveling as a bard and ends up creating stories about himself and singing them all around the Eastern Mediterranean. And then eventually, like when he gets bored enough, and the war is over, he goes back home, and his dad is thrilled to see him, which is a change of pace because they haven't got along very well up until that point. And he takes over as king and kind of hangs up his lyre and his sword and lives out his days not singing in case someone recognizes him. But he says occasionally other bards come through, and he always tips them better when they know his songs. But it's, again, strongly insinuated that the Odyssey that survives for us is in fact a composition of Odysseus that he essentially made up to make himself sound better than he was. I did like that very much. And then the closing chapter is,
Wait, wasn't that the one where he also bribed like a slave to murder Helen too?
yes, yep, that's exactly right. He bribes his slave to murder Helen so that the war will end, because Agamemnon isn't going to end it. And he does so, and well, she does so, and then the Trojans ambush them while they're all in this meeting about Helen being dead, and that's when Odysseus kind of escapes. One of the other ones that Odysseus narrates is the closing chapter, which is one of the longer ones, and I enjoyed that, both the chapter and its placement in the book, because it's Odysseus at the end of his life telling you about his last voyage, and he gathers all of the people from who were in Troy with him who are still alive. There's like probably about 5 of them, and a bunch of young men from Ithaca who just want to go on a jaunt, and they go and they kind of retrace his steps of the journey back. And Circe's house is abandoned, and Calypso's cave is abandoned, and they make it all the way back to Troy, which is somehow this like tourist attraction and full of actors dressed up as the Greek and the Trojan heroes, and there are market stalls everywhere, and it's fascinating to read. And it's told by an Odysseus he's old and happy with his life and honestly just ready to kind of go home. And the very last bit, he picks up this shield on the beach, and it's Achilles' shield, and he's like deeply moved and touched to have found it, and it feels wrong to take it away with him, so he throws it out into the ocean and then leaves to get back on his boat. And then the final paragraph is Athena watching him being very, very glad that he hadn't noticed that there is actually an entire stall selling those shields in the ruins of Troy. It was it was a nice ending to the book, and it was I enjoyed thinking about Odysseus at the end of his life, essentially having done all of these things and been this person, just being someone reminiscing. No,
It
it
was
was good.
strange because he comes off right as either he's an incorrigible liar or just a cruel coward who wants to get out of everything. Which is funny because actually that's how he's described, isn't it, in Virgil's Aeneid? As like the dude who like doesn't want to fight. But you know, the Aeneid, I have problems with that too. But I do love both of these snippets because what it presents you is you're essentially left with a question, right? Which is, so is Odysseus like the first literary figure to be considered the first truly unreliable storyteller or narrator in history? Or is he just is he right? Is he true? I don't know. It's kind of it definitely spoke to me as like a, why should we believe anything this man says or does? Because he's so like perfect. He's schizophrenic in his actions. I was like trying to find a word. I was like, what? How? I was like, why are you hot and cold? What, you up and down? What are you, dude? Yeah, he's like acting very schizophrenic. Because one moment he's like amazing and awesome and this, that, and the other thing, and then the next he's just like, ah, run away. Let's tell some stories. I will be Homer, but better. And then I'm gonna kill again with the killing of Helen because it is a character I don't love. I don't hate her as much as Paris, but again, I was kind of like, you bribed someone to kill her. The angels sing again. She's dead. But I'm also like, but we have seen enough things to know that she is kind of also an innocent victim. Even if you look at it as she ran away, certainly if you go by the she was stolen narrative. But so I didn't rejoice quite as much in her being murdered by a slave. I don't know. We've sussed out how complicated a relationship we have with Helen
It is
through
tricky.
all the different adaptations we've seen. But yeah, I was kind of, I don't know. I felt guilty. Did you kind of have a moment of, oh my god, yes, she's dead. She's gone.
I honestly wasn't sure that she was dead. The slave woman brings back her scalp, I think, which is in itself not pleasant, but also you don't have to be dead. So while I was reading, I was kind of waiting for there to be a twist and for Helen to be alive. And then we never actually find out because we follow Odysseus off on his journeys as a bard. Helen was interesting in this. She didn't, obviously, it's a book focused on Odysseus, but she's the different Helens that are presented are, I think, as varied as the different Odyssei. I don't know how we're pluralizing that, but it was
Uh,
yeah. The whole thing was just so interesting, and as someone who has worked with fragmentary ancient texts, having these snippets of literature, it felt not quite as frustrating as working with fragments of originals because there was usually some kind of narrative resolution in the story segments we're presented with, but it felt very much like you don't often have a whole text from beginning to end when you're translating. So having a whole book full of these little fragmentary stories that sometimes relate to each other and most of the time don't really, except that they all have this character who's a different character in everyone, was really, really interesting. Just the whole thing was interesting and fascinating, and I loved how it all came together but didn't make a coherent whole. It was really good.
yeah, I was gonna say actually that made me realize because I well also undergrad levels not as intense. But yeah, I haven't really worked with fragmentary material beyond reading Sappho fragments. And so I guess I'm not quite as familiar with how annoying it might be. But actually, it was funny because I was thinking about that and I was like, would you love to see this dude take on Sappho fragments and do his own like thing of
I
Sappho? Like
would.
this is something I desperately want to see. And so I did want to ask you, I was like, considering how like bonkers and crazy, but also it leaves so much room and creativity for more. If you were to take on any different like ancient works, what would you want this dude to take on?
Gilgamesh, actually, because I feel like there's, with the epic and also the shorter stories, there is a very wide scope for things that could be included. It's obviously not as extensive as the Iliad and the Odyssey, but there are a lot of different characters, there are a lot of divine figures that turn up, and it gives you room for things like the Mesopotamian flood narrative and Ishtar being the hot mess that she is. I'm going to be struck by lightning now, and all that kind of all that kind of thing. I think it would be a really, really interesting way to explore that section of Mesopotamian mythology.
I like that idea. I mean, we have. I didn't study ancient Mesopotamia, unfortunately, but if I remember, there's like one great translation of Gilgamesh that was kind of put into. Was it like a Penguin Classic? But that's it. Like we don't have anything else.
No, there are loads of translation. There are kids' books of it. There are novelizations of it. Andrew George is the standard kind of academic translation, and he did the Penguin Classic as well, which is fantastic. And Benjamin Foster did another one recently, which is also very good. So we have a good amount, but we don't have the same level of novelization, I think, that we see for Greek myth. It pops up here and there, but
Well,
it's not. Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously just because people have a greater unfamiliarity with ancient Mesopotamia in general. I mean, no one knows the names. They're like, "Oh, they're weird, they're hard. I don't know what this is." It doesn't immediately stand out to you the way like Egyptian mythology is bonkers. So people are like drawn to that and then they're like, "Oh, all these like animal-headed gods. This is weird." Um, and then Greek and Roman gods stand out to people because they're like people, just the worst of them. And even Norse mythology, which is also like massively weird, is still kind of on that border of bonkers, but also like kind of relatable because the way that they're described as being like kind of semi-spoiled special humans. So you're like, okay, yeah, I don't know. There's no like comparable thing. I feel like because whenever I've been able to delve into any kind of like Mesopotamian mythology, I'm just like, what,
I think
what?
there's a lot of room for it. I think it's because it's not in the public consciousness so much. People,
Mm.
like, for Norse stuff, we have the Marvel movies, which are obviously not retellings but include characters, and that kind of plugs people into Norse mythology that way. We've got the whole of classical literature is recreated in comic books and movies and all of this kind of thing, and we don't get the same kind of thing for Mesopotamia, which is a shame because I think if you're just looking at the gods, there is the same squabbles, there's the same infighting, there's the same like plotting and conspiracy and familial issues that you see in the classical set. It's just people don't know about them so much, so they don't get picked up for this kind of popular treatment.
I wish someone would take and like do a whole Percy Jackson type of series on Ishtar.
So someone not on Ishtar, it's Salwat Chadha, who is a British man, and it's under the Rick Riordan Presents label.
Okay.
And it's his first book is City of the Play God, and it's following a kid, obviously interacting with the Mesopotamian god. Which one is it? Jesus. Nergal, there we go, who is the
Ah.
plague god. So he's an Iraqi boy, and it follows his adventures essentially. And you find like Gilgamesh is in there as a pacifist and a vegan baker, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's really good. And he's the second one I think is dealing with Tiamat, but that's not been released yet.
Oh, the celestial being Tiamat.
Hmm.
Every time I hear that, I desperately want to think of like ancient Mesopotamia. Unfortunately, Marvel ruined it because when
Yeah,
I think of the celestial Tiamat, I think of Eternals, and I'm like, yeah. So my perception is skewed, unfortunately. I don't know.
that is okay. And we have wandered far.
It's my favorite thing to take these little tangents because, well, I'm so into reception that anything that's even tangentially related.
And again, with this book, it's a whole book of tangents.
Because I feel like the point of the book, though, is to get you thinking of, like, okay, this is clearly different. This is not the source material. Where did he get this tangent? Is he picking on the smallest rumors or like a tiniest mention, one word? But I think I love it because it invites your own tangents, right? Like, as I was saying, as I was listening to it, my own tangent started because then I was automatically thinking of, okay, well, what reception-y things do I know that could have easily fit into this work? A lot of Assassin's Creed, I was like,
Hmm.
that could all fit in
Yeah,
here because that works. So I, yeah, initially not liking it because I do like my narratives much more linear, much more easy to fall into and understand. So once I got used to stylistically how it's set up and where I found myself being like, I think I shouldn't be going on a tangent. Why am I thinking of like 10 other things that make me want to reread or rewatch? But I was like,
hmm,
no, this is what it's for. And I think it goes into the larger conversation of like the wider conversation about reception of classical material. Cause like what he's doing is receiving it and then changing it. And then he wants you and invites you to think about what other things you've seen. Or if there hasn't been anything done, I feel like this work invites you to imagine then, well, if we were to create a
hmm.
different, thing that was reception, what would we do? So I don't know. I liked it because of the wide open space. And it gave us this space to imagine far more than any of the other things we've read because it's a solid narrative. So you don't need to. You just go, oh, okay. It might be
It's
similar
just
to one or
that the
two
gaps are
things, but
already filled in for you.
exactly. So that's what I really loved about this one. Thoughts.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think, again, I hated it after the first three chapters, and then I kept going, and it's really, really good. It's a fantastic book, and I enjoyed it very much. I think you're right. I think it invites you to think about the gaps in stories and how they get filled in, and all the different ways that what truth in inverted commas could be translated into. Like, if we're taking the Homeric epic as truth, the many different ways that that can be worked around and subverted and retold in a way that it still hangs together with the same main plot points, but it's just a very, very different experience.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. But also, I was thinking of a work when I was listening to it. Watch, I'm not gonna be able to remember it now, and it's gonna come back to me. Who knows when?
3 a.m.
I mean, no, it's always. I feel like it always happens. I'm thinking of something, and I'm like, yes, in the moment, and then, this should be a lesson. I should really write things down. Okay, well, I'll skip on to the second point because I clearly can't remember the first. But I was having a conversation the other day about with someone who is not a classicist. They're completely different. I think what are they into? They're the film major or something like that. Anyway, I was talking to someone who was asking about the work that classes do and the things I've seen from my perspective, and we got talking about like just differences in it sparked yes, okay, now I'm placing the conversation. It started because I got a question asked, which is, oh, I've never read any of these materials, these epics. I've heard of them, but I've never read them. I want to read them. So, what translation do you recommend? And I said, well, that's a contentious question. I said, it depends because every classicist will have a different idea about what the best is. And this person was like, oh, I didn't know. Why would this be contentious? And I said, well, it goes down to it goes down to translation of the original Greek. Because I was like, I mean, the words are similar, but everyone's going to translate it different. So then I gave him the example of, let's say in a certain translation, someone uses the translation of the shiny eyed Lacedaemonians, whatever. And then a different translation says the bright eyed. And I was like, well, you can infer however you want. But I'm like, okay, so what do you think is the difference? Does it change the context of the sentence, whether someone says the bright eyed or the shiny eyed? Probably not that much in the end, but it still is different. And so I was like, it just depends. Like, do you want to be closer to the original source material? Do you want to be
Do you want
not
to
as
go for
close
ease of
word for
reading and
word?
understanding,
Right.
or
But you just want clarity. And so it was this big discussion with this person, and they like it was like fireworks going off in their brain because their mind was suddenly opened up, and they were like, "What? Oh my gosh!" And I was like, "Yeah, I know. This is exciting. This is part of being a classicist. This is what we love. We love debating endlessly what translations are better." I mean, at the end of all of that, I said, I personally, and it's probably I've been influenced just because of what translations I was reading in classes and what we worked off of. But I personally like the Fagles translation because I think for me that one is more for ease of reading, even if I mean, it's still pretty good, right? They're all pretty close, but I like the Fagles translations the best. Although I do own, like any good classicist, I own about 4 or 5 different copies, different
multiple?
translations.
Mm,
I really like the Stephen Mitchell one, but that one's much closer to the original Greek, I think. I'm really excited. Once Emily Wilson finishes her Iliad, I will be buying that and have a 6th copy. But yeah, I don't know. I was like, I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah. I don't know where I was going with that, but I guess it was tangentially related to like any good translation where you're debating and fighting over like specific translations and word choices
mhm.
and adaptations and stuff. This book kind of fits into that with the characters. I was noticing,
Yeah,
like, when you're deciding to read something, it kind of goes into the large canon of, because I don't know, I was sitting there at the ending like, would I be likely to want to reread this or recommend it to somebody? Yeah, I was kind of like, well, it's kind of like a translation thing where either you'll love it because it's different, but I also know some super traditionalist classicists who would hate this no matter how
hmm
good it got. They would just be like, no, this is not, I prefer closer to the original and not so derivative. So yeah, those are
yeah.
just some of my last minute thoughts on the book as a whole.
They're good thoughts.
Thank you. I like to
We
think that
should
I have good thoughts.
we should probably end there because I don't think I have anything to add except this is a good book. It was challenging but excellent, and I would recommend it.
Perfect. Look at that. I get to mic drop my way out of this episode. I won't really drop my mic, everyone. Don't worry. Don't be afraid for my mic. It will be beautifully, softly placed down.
Well, thank you, Lexi.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, thank you for. I feel like for going on this journey with me and this really strange journey. So thank you because I don't know anyone else really who would want to go through this strange journey so consistently, right?
It has been a delight and a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.